Welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
This time, we're tackling a listener request. We're exploring quite a fascinating and, well, pretty shadowy organization from World War II.
The Geheime Feldpolizei, the GFP.
Exactly, the GFP. Our listener wants that sharp, insightful understanding, without getting totally bogged down in endless detail.
And that's what we aim for, a shortcut to getting a handle on it.
So we've dug into the research, some really detailed excerpts, actually.
Yes, quite specific material.
Our mission today is basically to understand how the GFP came about, what they actually did, and why they mattered within that whole Nazi military and security setup.
It's interesting because their emergence, the GFP's start, it was tied directly to Nazi Germany's expansion before the war even officially began.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, after the Sudetenland annexation in 38, and then occupying Bohemia in 39,
Right.
the OKW, the German High Command, they realized they needed something specific, a specialized intelligence agency, but one with police powers operating right inside the military structure.
To counter opposition, resistance.
Exactly. The idea was to nip any potential resistance in the bud in these new territories, right from the get-go.
Okay, let's dig into that formation a bit more. It sounds like maybe this wasn't a completely brand new concept.
Well, the sources do mention they looked at data, information from places like Spain, Austria, Czechoslovakia.
Ah, so they were learning from recent conflicts and takeover.
On to tailor something specific, yeah.
And the recruitment is interesting, too. You said criminal Polizei.
Yep, CRIPO. Criminal investigation units already assigned to the armed forces.
And the SD, the Sicherheitsdienst?
Right, the Nazi Party's own intelligence service.
So right away, you've got this mix. Military police types and party intelligence people.
Precisely. A real blend from the start.
And initially, it was just a Wehrmacht thing.
Exclusively Wehrmacht security, yes. But that changed.
When?
In 1942, operational control shifted. They were essentially absorbed by the Reich Security Main Office, the RSHA.
The RSHA. That was the big umbrella organization, right?
Yeah.
Gestapo, SD.
That's the one. Consolidated a lot of the security and police forces.
But the GFP kept a distinct role.
Yes. Their classification is key here. They were seen as a Verpolizei,
Meaning?
basically the executive branch, the enforcement arm of the Abwehr German military intelligence.
So even under the RSHA later, their primary link was still Wehrmacht intelligence?
Their roots and main affiliation stayed there, yes.
So this hybrid military secret police, what exactly were they doing? Their responsibilities seem, well, huge.
Oh, incredibly broad. You've got standard military police stuff, but also secret police work, counter-propaganda, counterinsurgency.
Counterintelligence, criminal investigation, crowd control, it just goes on.
Yeah, force protection, intelligence assessment, law enforcement, raids, security checkpoints.
It really feels like they were the Wehrmacht's all-purpose security troubleshooters.
Pretty much. And the fact they often worked in plainclothes, undercover.
Right, that really emphasizes the Geheim, the secret part.
Absolutely. And their authority was significant.
How so?
The sources laid out pretty clearly. Power to just pass through military roadblocks, enter any military building they wanted.
Use military communication lines.
Yes. And even commandeer vehicles. Get supplies. Gave them a lot of independence on the ground.
And in occupied areas, what were the main tasks there?
A real mix again. Sometimes routine-sounding things like escorting VIPs.
But also the darker stuff.
Definitely. Assisting state security with counter-espionage, interrogating suspects, trying to prevent sabotage, sniffing out enemy agents.
That's a lot of power concentrated in one military group, sort of bypassing normal channels.
It really is. And it tells you something about how that regime operated, blurring those lines.
Okay, let's shift to how they actually operated in different places. Because it wasn't the same everywhere, was it?
No, definitely not uniform. If you look at Western Europe, the Netherlands, Denmark, Norway,
Yeah.
their main job seems to have been, well, secret police protection for the top Wehrmacht officers.
Like a specialized bodyguard unit for the general?
It's almost, yeah, a high-level security detail.
But that changes in places like Belgium and France.
It does. Their role meshed more with the civilian police forces, the ones under German control, of course.
But they were working alongside them or directing them.
More like acting as an executive part of them, directly involved in hitting resistance movements.
Including the British SOE.
Yes, and dealing with sabotage attempts. And this is where the methods get, well, pretty grim.
Terror tactics.
Exactly. Detentions, deportations, executing hostages. That became part of their standard toolkit.
The sources mention headquarters in Paris, the Hotel Bradford, and sections in Brussels.
That's right.
And it says, despite not being huge in numbers, They were central to the terror apparatus in France for 4 years.
Their impact definitely outweighed their size. They played a key role in that climate of fear.
And then there was this restructuring, May 42, under Karl Oberg.
Yeah, a significant reorganization. Created something called Group 610 and the Commando for Capital Repression.
Capital Crimes Unit.
Yeah.
Sounds ominous.
And certainly suggests they were formalizing some of their harsher functions.
What about that shooting range, Ballard? Was that GFP?
Actually, no.
Right.
That infamous place, used for torture and executions, that was run by the SS.
Ah, okay.
But the GFP did oversee the French Brigade Spéciale.
Part of the French police intelligence.
Yes, but specialized units used to track down what they called internal enemies. Resistance members, mainly.
And the GFP influenced their methods.
Heavily. Torture, manhunts, surveillance, intense interrogations. You can see the GFP's hand in shaping how those French units operated.
Right. Now, Eastern Europe and the Balkans, the sources suggest things get even worse there.
Oh, considerably worse. It talks about an escalating terror.
Against who, maybe?
Partisans, Jews, and basically anyone the Germans just deemed suspect. It was incredibly broad and brutal. Their involvement started early, right after the invasion of Poland in '39, these so-called pacification and security duties.
Pacification duties. Sounds like a euphemism.
A massive understatement. They often worked under SS direction, and crucially, got logistical help from local army commanders.
Help doing what?
Transporting civilian prisoners to places where they could be murdered. That's a direct quote.
Chilling. And they clashed initially with the Einsatzgruppen, the death squads, over jurisdiction?
Yes, there were some initial squabbles about who operated where, but Walter Schellenberg brokered an agreement.
What was the outcome?
Basically, the Einsatzgruppen got a pretty free hand to operate in rear areas and near the front lines.
So collaboration became the norm.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
And that incident near Kiev, Belayet Serkov, August 41.
The children.
The GFP rounded up 90 children and just handed them over to Sonderkommando 4A to be executed.
It's just beyond words, direct complicity in mass murder.
Absolutely stark. And not isolated. They ran joint pacification programs with the SS.
Where was this?
The Zhytomyr region in Ukraine is one example. GFP units 708, 701, 730 were involved.
What were their missions?
Securing rear areas, protecting railways and roads, pursuing the enemy, which very often meant civilians, arrests, reprisals, executing partisans.
And this tied into Barbarossa.
Directly linked to Operation Barbarossa and the infamous Commissar Order. It was part of the overall genocidal policy.
The sources also talk about them setting up new administrations in occupied Russia, political purges.
Yes, end quote, the extermination of an entire societal layer, just wiping out opposition, real or perceived.
And they had OKW approval to operate outside the law, against Bolsheviks commissars.
Explicit approval. Total lawlessness, basically, sanctioned from the top regarding certain groups.
Their collaboration with the SD torture executions.
It was routine. They'd hand over captured Red Army officers, commissars, straight to the SD.
And using prisoners for mine clearing.
Yes, communists and Jews forced into incredibly dangerous work like clearing minefields. A complete disregard for life.
So the phrase general supervision of the population
is a grotesque euphemism for what were often murderous operations.
Just finding someone wandering around could be a death sentence.
In occupied Russia, yes. If you were found wandering, you'd likely be turned over to the GFP or SD. Suspicion of reconnaissance was often enough. Fatal consequences were common.
And their own doctrine, what did it say?
The segments quoted are brutal. Ruthless and merciless annihilation of the enemy. It even talks about the need for the hardest soldier to suppress emotion.
Dehumanizing. And the numbers. Unit 721 killing 10,000 Jews in Ukraine.
Between October 41 and January 42 alone. And there were other cases. GSP units acting independently, shooting Jewish people.
There's that observation from Greece, too, under Officer Bergmayer.
Yes, March 1944. He noted the local population seemed happy about Jewish deportations. It shows the deep-seated anti-Semitism within the GFP itself.
And burning villages, executing prisoners before retreats.
All part of it. Burning homes, sometimes with collaborators still inside, killing prisoners summarily before pulling out, leaving nothing but destruction.
And that 1943 report figure, 21,000 killed on the Eastern Front.
Yes, and the report itself notes, chillingly, some in combat, and many shot after interrogation.
Shifting slightly, what about desertion from the Wehrmacht? The GFT dealt with that too.
They did. From mid-1943, Tracking and capturing deserters became a specific task.
Why them particularly?
More German soldiers started joining partisan groups as the tide turned, and desertion rates really spiked in 1944 after major retreats.
The numbers were high.
Over 3,000 arrested from just Army Group Center in 1944. Shows the scale of the issue and the GFP's role in trying to clamp down.
It must have been chaotic in the rear areas.
Extremely.
Wow.
And that chaos meant some soldiers were probably wrongly labeled as deserters.
Punishment for actual deserters.
Usually shot or sent to the Strafe Battalion, the penal battalions, which is often a death sentence itself.
And they even investigated defeatism talk among regular soldiers.
Yes, listening for any signs of low morale or dissent. Shows the regime's paranoia, using fear to maintain control even within its own army.
Then there was Group 729. What was that?
A specialist unit. Their job was interrogating Wehrmacht soldiers who'd escaped from Soviet POW camps.
Why interrogate your own escaped soldiers?
Fear. Fear they'd been re-educated by the NKVD, exposed to anti-fascist ideas. Paranoia, basically.
Was there a special camp for them?
Yes, in Danzig. And the sources say treatment there was brutal, often ending in execution. Deep distrust, even of their own men who'd survived Soviet captivity.
Right. Let's talk structure. How is the GFP actually organized?
Okay, so at the very top, you had the Hürstlerchef,
Yeah.
Chief of Army Police, initially a major, later an Oberst, a colonel.
And under him?
The Feldpolizei director,
Mm-hmm.
equivalent to a major. They commanded a GFP unit called a group.
How big was a group?
Standard size was about 50 personnel. That included the director, military police, support staff.
But bigger in the east.
Yes, for the Soviet Union, they were beefed up. Around 95 personnel, including auxiliary field police officers brought in from the Wehrmacht.
And they were mobile, equipped.
Fully motorized, yeah. Cars, motorcycles. And equipped with light infantry, weapons rifles, machine pistols. So they had mobility and some firepower.
And the Luftwaffe had its own version.
It did, from 1943. The Luftwaffe set up its own GFP, which led to some rank restructuring across the board.
Okay, crucial question. How did they fit in with the other Nazi organizations, Gestapo, SS, SD?
Well, even though they were technically a distinct military organization, their duties often overlapped heavily with the Gestapo and the Kripo.
And their methods?
Very similar to the SD and the SS, especially in occupied countries. That's how they earned that nickname, the Gestapo der Wehrmacht.
The Wehrmacht's Gestapo. That says a lot.
It does. And that blurring became more official in 1944 when GFP units were put under RSHA command.
Fully integrated into that wider security apparatus then.
Pretty much, yeah.
What happened to them after the war, their status?
It's a bit complex and, frankly, disturbing.
Yeah.
You know, Himmler tried to disguise himself as a GFT guy.
Really?
He used the name Heinrich Hitzinger. Ironically, it backfired. He got caught because the GFP was already on the Allied list of criminal organizations.
Ah, so they were classed as criminal.
Well, this is the complicated part. At the main Nuremberg trials, the GFP as an organization wasn't definitively proven to be part of the Gestapo.
So not automatically criminal like the SS or Gestapo?
Not automatically as a whole group, no. Exceptions were made for members who'd transferred to specific Gestapo offices, amped foo for the RSHA, or belonged to other groups declared criminal.
So for many ex-GFP members.
They just sort of melted back into civilian life initially.
But that changed later. There were trials.
Yes, later trials did catch up with some. There was a trial in Vitebsk in '66.
Against whom?
Former Soviet POWs who'd been forced to serve with the GFP and were involved in executions back in 41, 42.
But another in 67.
In Gomel, yeah. Against 10 former GFP members believed to be living in West Germany at the time. And other trials involving police battalions sometimes implicated GFP officers in crimes against Soviet citizens.
So accountability did come, eventually, for some individuals.
It did. It shows that even if the organization had this ambiguous legal status right after the war, the specific criminal actions of its members were pursued later on.
And the ranks just clarified their military position.
Yeah, the list shows how they fit in the Wehrmacht hierarchy, from Feldpolizei assistant, like an NCO, up to the Polizeichef, the colonel equivalent at the top.
Okay, so let's try and pull this together. Summing up this deep dive. The Geheime Feldpolizei started as a specific response to Nazi expansion.
Right, born out of security concerns in newly occupied territories.
Evolved from being purely Wehrmacht to operating under the RSHA's control.
And their range of tasks was incredibly wide.
And often incredibly brutal, especially in Eastern Europe.
Yes, the operations there were particularly horrific.
And while technically military, their methods really mirrored the Gestapo and SS.
Hence the nickname, yeah. The lines were very blurred.
Their post-war status was murky initially, but some members did face justice later. It's definitely, well, a much more complex picture than just calling them military police.
Absolutely. And thinking about all this, it really leaves you with a crucial question to mull over.
Which is?
Well, you have this organization, the GFP. It's part military police, part secret police, using those kinds of methods. What does that tell you about how lines blur, between military and internal security functions, especially in totalitarian states?
The dangers of that kind of overlap.
Precisely. And what are the longer-term consequences for the rule of law, for human rights, when a state's military starts acting like a secret police force, using that kind of violence and repression against civilians, both inside and outside its borders?
That's a heavy thought to end on.
It is. But it's important. We really encourage you, the listener, to dig deeper. Look into the sources we touched on. Find related material.
Yeah.
Keep exploring this disturbing but absolutely vital piece of history.